Welcome to Birdsong with your host, Kayuta Kiora, exploring all things related to the path of shamanism, nature-based spirituality, truth-seeking, storytelling, awakening, health and wellness, earth-honoring traditions, ceremony, ritual, rites of passage, and of course, a remembering of the sacred ways. Hey, it's Caillou here. Welcome to another episode of Birdsong. In this particular episode, we have Renée McCready joining us. Now, also known as Lady Pachamama, Renée is a plant wisdom keeper. She's a ceremonialist, shamanic healer and therapist, a kitchen witch, a yoga teacher. She's an earth doula, a bio-regionalist, and a practicing animist, amongst many other things. She runs various workshops, sacred cacao ceremonies, mentoring programs, and her own personal practice from the forest highlands of regional Victoria, Australia, which just so happens to be her home. She offers ceremonial work with the sacred cacao and other plant medicines, spiritual nutrition and education around food as medicine, plant and earth wisdom work, ancestral healing, embodiment work, amongst many other threads of that nature, and it's part of her mission to help people recalibrate and realign back to what she calls their own original human blueprint, which is something that we'll touch on during this episode. But essentially what we are speaking to here is our roots within nature, our remembrance to our ancestral lineages that have a reverence and solid connection to the land beneath their feet, beneath our feet, which ties into nourishing that mind-body-soul connection that we all have and tapping into our own unique personal medicines, our passions, our heart, and of course, our purpose, our reason for being here. As you might guess from her bio, there was a lot to unpack and explore within this episode, and we touched on many of these themes, and it was a real pleasure to welcome Renée to the show. Now, just before we get into the heart of this conversation, I'll touch on a couple of things really quickly. I had just come off an average night of sleep, so despite nourishing myself with some neural support through herbs and magical concoctions and early morning sunshine and nature immersion, I wasn't firing on as many cylinders as I would have liked, but that's totally okay. I'm very much aware that I'm still in the early stages of learning this craft of being the host of something like Birdsong. And I trust things are only going to become more fluid and gain more coherence over time. I'll leave it at that for now. I hope you enjoy and trust you'll find value in the following dialogue to carry with you on your own path forward.
Perfect. Let's do it.
Perfect. Okay, so Renée, kia ora. Welcome to Birdsong. Big thanks for being here and lots of appreciation to you for taking some time out of your morning to be on the show.
Of course, it's an absolute pleasure. And I'm just so excited to be able to sit with you and talk about all the things.
Great. Yes. So to allow the tree frond of this particular conversation to emerge and unfold, I'm going to invite you to share a few words in relation to the direction that this show is moving, which is essentially to try and bring an essence of the sacred into these digital containers. And as we know, opening and closing a ceremonial or a ritualistic container typically involves an offering of some sort. And maybe it's a physical offering, maybe it's an offering of certain energies, it could be an offering of thoughts or words or feelings. But whatever it is that we are offering, we're essentially signifying our intention to drop into a little sacred moment in time. So my invitation is for you to share something to open up our own little sacred container in light of how you would typically do so in your own ceremonial or ritualistic space. So welcome once again, Renée, and the space is all yours to share something.
Thank you. So I think maybe a nice way to sort of open up the space would be just slowing everything down. Just slowing down our thoughts and slowing down our breath, maybe just closing our eyes for a moment and taking a couple of big, deep breaths down into our belly, into the hara. And as we're just slowing the breath down, just becoming aware of our surroundings, of what we can imagine through our closed eyes in the space around us. And as we do that, just giving gratitude to the space that holds us right now. Wherever we are, whatever room we're in or space we're in, just gratitude to the spirit of that place and just inviting that spirit of place in to be present with us and inviting the medicines of that spirit of place to be present with us. And just noticing the breath and noticing our bodies and noticing the position that our body is holding in the space. And just in those spaces between, again, just observing whatever's there, thoughts that come in, feelings that present, memories that might turn up. And just again, we're just watching, observing, being present, and giving that reciprocity and that offering back through our own breath. And then just pushing our energy with our out breath all the way down into the earth, into Pachamama, into Papatui Nuku, we call her in New Zealand. And just giving our gratitude to the earth that holds us, the earth that moves us. And then when you're ready, just opening our eyes, and here we are together.
Yeah, big thank you. A beautiful little offering to open up our space to continue on with this conversation.
Thanks, bye.
Based on your bio, there is a lot to unpack, and there are many things that I would love to explore with you in this particular dialogue, including the plant wisdom keeping and elements of shamanism, being an earth doula and a bioregionalist, alongside a few other threads of that nature. But what I would love to open up a conversation with is something that's detailed in your bio, and that is that you help people reconnect or recalibrate or realign back to their original human blueprint. So I'm curious to know what the original human blueprint means to you, and it'd not be nice to receive your personal story of alignment or perhaps realignment back to your own original human blueprint.
Oh, it's a good question. So I suppose the reason why I kind of use that language is I feel like every single person at a cellular level holds memory and knowing that has been part of them through lifetime after lifetime. And we hold that spark or that frequency of energy within our soul's blueprint. And often what I feel, and this is sort of my own personal sort of understanding, is that that part of us sometimes needs help or needs awakening in our lifetime to bring forth our medicines, our personal medicines and our personal gifts that we have to be of service to the world, and also for our own personal growth, or even just to hold the container of our own families in a loving and balanced way. And so I suppose what sort of drives me is seeing that light switch on in people and seeing that awakening happen within that part of themselves. And when someone suddenly feels as though they've done that before, there's that remembering happening, like, oh, this is so familiar to me. I know this feeling. And that's probably because you've been there before. And part of that blueprint, I feel, is connected to all of our ancestors and all of our ancestors and all of the people that came before us, and all of the witches and all of the shamans and all of the wisdom keepers that placed all of that energy within the earth. And really, it's about activating. And when we connect that part of us to the earth, there is this synergistic relationship that happens that awakens that part of ourselves within our blueprint. Yeah. Does that answer
So
your question?
the feeling that I'm getting is that in this particular context, the original human blueprint is very much related to our ancestry and our ancestry of having deep roots within the natural world and being in deep relation with the natural world and all that's around us.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That's a nice, succinct way of putting it.
Okay.
And yeah, and it's available for everyone. And I feel like it's this innate knowing that sits inside us, and it sits inside our blood, and it sits inside our bones, and it sits inside the earth. And I guess that's why for me, I feel so passionate about reconnecting people back to nature, because when I see it all the time with students and clients and people who come do ceremony with me, I see that moment often when there's that aha, and I feel like often it comes in this flood of knowing and remembering. So that's kind of, yeah, that's a very, very overall umbrella, poignant sort of frequency that I probably pass on through my work.
Mm. So what were the early days like for you? Was this something that you were brought up into through your ancestral lineage or through your parents, or is this something that you tapped into much later along your path?
Um, A little bit of both. I grew up in I grew up in New Zealand, and I grew up in a place called Queenstown, and a lot of people know it. It's in the mountains. It's very, very beautiful. And from a very early age, I was always outside and always in nature and always communing. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, but I was doing that. And so I had a very sort of like a very open, alternative kind of upbringing. That's probably a good way of putting it. So the parameters were always very expansive for me to kind of explore. So I feel like in that way it was part of my upbringing. And then I chose from a very early age to step into the wellness industry, and I did that firstly via studying herbal medicine when I think I was like 18 or 19 years old. So a long time ago, pre computers. It was all handwritten work back in those days.
Mm.
And, um, and so it was kind of this natural kind of flow for me to move into something that was going to be of service. But there was one particular thing that happened to me when I was 4 years old that I feel was a point of, um, remembering in my timeline, where I actually almost drowned. And in Queenstown, we have a lake called Lake Wakatipu Wa Māori. And at 4 years old, I was very into the elemental realm, and I decided that I'd be able to fly. So I started running along a jetty, and I put my little arms out and I was flapping my arms, and then I actually um, landed in the water, started sinking down. I couldn't swim at 4. And all I remember is my whole body sort of going limp, and then some energy coming up from underneath the water and pushing me up. And then a man came in and pulled me out of the water. And the story I told at 4 years old was that a taniwha, I don't know if you know about taniwhas, but they're like a water deity or a water monster,
Mm.
a water creature. It's a Māori word in New Zealand. Pushed me up from underneath, and that was the story that I told. I completely was convinced, and I would suggest it would have been the non-ordinary reality that I was accessing at the time. Um, and from that day on, I had this deep connection with the lake and with this energy of the lake. And I would go to the lake and I would watch the water coming in onto the beach of the lake. And I would talk to the taniwha of the lake. And obviously, that was never abnormal to me as a small child. And it's only as an adult that I can see how important that moment was in maybe my connection to the land and to animism and the belief of spirit and all things.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what I was going to comment on. It seems like that was a spark in your earlier life that kind of seeded these animistic roots for those to take hold and spread throughout the rest of your life.
Yeah, in a very unconscious way, which I love because it's not then attached to it having to be a certain way, or it's attached to ego. It just was. Yeah.
And then at some stage along the way, you obviously made the journey over here to Australia and started to plant some roots on this soil.
Yeah. Yeah, I did that in my early 20s. I actually originally came to study naturopathy, and didn't get very far, because I ended up traveling. And while I was traveling, I became pregnant with my son. But I managed to spend some time in the Himalayas and pregnant, which was awesome. And then I came back to Australia, and that's kind of where I stayed.
Mm. And now you've bunkered down in a nice little forest area up in the highlands of
Yeah,
Victoria.
yeah, the regional highlands. It's Wombat State Forest. I live in a little village called Blackwood up here, and it's literally in the middle of the forest. So I am surrounded by the tree people, and yeah, it is like probably one of the best moves I've ever made is moving up here. We're moving into our 5th year now.
Mm, amazing. So this ties into one of the areas that I would love to explore because being a forest dweller and living in the forest highlands, you're all about the plant wisdom keeping and nature based spirituality and this curious word that I mentioned. And there are probably not that many people tapping into the collective that are familiar with this word, and it's bioregionalism. I would love to
Yes.
hear a little bit of an exploration on your behalf of what bioregionalism is and how it can slot into all of our lives.
Okay. Well, it's something again that's really important to me and close to my heart for a couple of reasons. And how I came across the concept was through initiation work and through rites of passage. So, through quietly just working with the plant realm and with the land up here. I never knew that word existed before I moved here, although I had been involved in herbalism for many, many years. So, bioregionalism is basically it's understanding the place that you live. It's building a relationship with the land that you walk on and understanding how that co-creative relationship with the land plays out moment by moment every day with for you. So it's about also understanding the geography of the land. So understanding the region itself. So what are your closest mountain ranges, the rivers, the streams, the lakes? And if you live in a city, it would be what are the closest parks, the ocean, or the waterways that run around the region that you live? Or you would also look at maybe the suburb. And what I encourage my students to do is even go back in time and look at photographs of what the land was like, or understand who the original indigenous were that held the space there previously, back before everyone else decided to move there. Um, and with bioregionalism, what we're understanding is working within the medicines that the land holds that we work on. So we wouldn't be inviting in medicines and from South America or from like the States or something like that, unless it was something that grew here and there, or we could grow
Mm,
here as well.
mm,
Yeah,
mm,
yeah. And it's about respect for that. So we the respect of a bioregionalist is we go to the place, we go to the bioregion to work with that medicine. Because what we're doing is we're working in a space of sovereignty and totality. So rather than separating things out because it's of need to us, we're having respect for the land itself and the relationship that it creates with us in its totality and the whole holographic that it holds.
I would love to hear a little bit more of an exploration so I could get my head around the concept of sovereignty within that context. What do you mean by so we can tap into more of that sovereignty and that totality?
Okay, so when I speak about the word sovereignty, I often use the term, you would have probably heard me, Kai, the plant sovereignty. And what it is about is about empowering that space or empowering that land or empowering that plant or empowering that space by having a deep reverence and respect and working in a reciprocal relationship with it. So I'm not just going to that land or going to that plant to take from that plant or take from that land, because to do that I'm not honoring that particular source in its totality or in its sovereignty and its connection to source. And when we understand that it is completely connected to source, just like we are, everything is, we can see that it holds the totality of its holographic nature within itself. And then we can access whatever medicine it is from that in a much more honest and a transparent way. So I guess it's taking it back to the roots of, as a human, I'm not dominating on this, and I'm not just in this to take and receive. I'm also in this to give and to honor with prayer, offering, reverence. Yeah.
Yeah, so the way that I'm trying to perceive what you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're moving out of a space where we're just talking about personal sovereignty, as in myself or anyone else as a unique individual entity, but we're looking at it from the space that we are interrelated with all things, and we're developing that sovereignty, as you say, within the totality of that understanding that everything is connected and we are in constant relationship to our environment that's all around us. So that's what we want to be tending our relationship in this way. Is that correct?
Perfect,
Yeah.
perfect. And it's something that we used to do. And it's something that a lot of Indigenous people and tribes globally still do. And even in our culture, in our particular cultures, more Western cultures, we have it too. In the Celtic cultures and the paganistic cultures, it's being forgotten. So part of, I feel that my job is of being of service is just to remind people and help sort of put them, in a space where they can do that remembering through their blueprints, through their cells.
Mm. Does this tie into being an earth doula in any
Yes.
sense? So,
I guess, yeah, that's just maybe just a way of trying to sort of wrap it all up into it maybe like a terminology that I can
okay.
easily yeah.
Yeah, sure. When I think about the word doula, it's kind of associated either with the process of giving birth or with the process of dying and death. So if I was to take a bit of a zoom out and consider what some of the similarities might be, what some of the links might be within the word doula, I'd probably suggest that it's not unreasonable to think that a doula might be someone that has a holistic understanding of whatever process it is that they're assisting within. And, from that bird's eye view, maybe it's that assistance from transitioning from one stage of life through another or into another, or helping the development of a particular type of relationship to form that could be the primary thread of similarity.
Yeah.
Help on the mental, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual. So is that kind of what you might consider the common thread to be when we're talking about what a doula might be?
Correct. And another word to put in there is like caretaker.
Mm,
So, like a space holder.
mm,
Like doulas hold the energy, they hold the container, they hold the space. And I think that's one of my greatest medicines is being a space holder,
mm,
for the land, for the plants, for the people to come and
mhm,
sit with them. and I don't try and push my belief. I try and allow the space for it to birth naturally from people, for example. So
Mm,
there's no forced understanding. There's an understanding that comes through initiation.
mm,
And definitely just another point there, Kai, when you were talking about the birth and the death cycle, part of being working as in nature spirituality and working with plants is also that we understand the seasons and the cycles. So we're working through the birth and the death cycle of plants continuously through the seasons. And when you're working with plant work and initiation work, part of the rite of passage is to work from the seed right to the growth cycle, to the plant dying, to collecting the seed again, and then working ancestrally back through that lineage again and again and again.
mm.
And each time we go back through that cycle, we're understanding more about the plant, more about the medicine, both medicinally, but also from a plant spirit perspective. So, in a way, we can liken that to our human journey, how our souls move around the Shiva Shakti, they move around the cycle over and over and over again.
Mm. And this is one of your, or at least this has been one of your primary offerings. It's been around not only this concept of bioregionalism and being a custodian of the earth, but it's surrounding spiritual nutrition and food as medicine. And they are, well, they seem to be, for me, one of the primary reasons that we would be tending the seed at the start of the season and following it through all the way, from spring to summer, autumn, winter, because we are typically building a relationship with these seeds, with these plants, with these herbs, because they have something for us to offer. They have something for us to offer, whether that is some sort of energetic spiritual connection that we're developing with them, or whether it's something on a nutritional level or a medicinal level. And perhaps all of those threads aren't necessarily separate. I think they're all inextricably intertwined. So
Yeah.
what I'm interested in hearing your perspective on is, down here in Australia, we are moving into the cooler, wetter months. So when it comes to developing a relationship with certain plants and certain herbs, talk us through like about food as medicine and using herbs in a cyclical kind of seasonal context, and what we might want to be looking out for within these kind of wetter seasons if we want to be developing a relationship with nature.
Well, that's a great question. So, I suppose shamanically, we would say we're moving into bear medicine time. We're moving into the dream time, and we're moving into the space between. So, it's a really, really good time for us to be nourishing ourselves um, through bone medicine work. So, the foods that we would be wanting to look at working with right now from a food as medicine perspective would be things that are slow cooked stews and soups and congees and infusions and things that will really deeply nourish us on a bone and blood level. Um, and one of the things that we can do also at this particular time is a really good thing that I'd like to offer is a suggestion, which is making a medicinal vinegar. And this is a really safe way for people to start to understand food as medicine because um, all you really need to do is understand a little bit about some wild food if you do, things like dandelions and chickweed comes up at this time of year, and that's incredibly nourishing for the lymphatic system. And chickweed often will grow in people's gardens, and it's really easy to identify and it's very safe to eat. And the plants that grow in large quantities are generally the plants that want to nourish us and tonify our bodies. So, and if there's plenty of information out there, and I mean, obviously, people are welcome to contact me if they want to understand a bit more about food as medicine and wild food like foraging. But if that's not comfortable with you, you can just go to the local greengrocer and you can buy a big bunch of parsley or basil, and you can place it into apple cider vinegar and leave it for 6 weeks. And what happens is the vinegar extracts all the minerals from the plant material, specifically the calcium, and you have this mineral rich, beautiful medicine that you can then add to your soups and stews and steamed vegetables and salads and so forth. Just basically, it's like taking our food to the next level without us having to go into the realm of supplementation. So we're actually looking at the whole, again, the totality of a plant rather than separating it out.
Mm. Yeah, and this
Yeah.
can be one of the tricky things I feel for, at least it was for me at the start of my journey, and I know it still can be, that when we're going to the greengrocers or the supermarkets, we are presented with an abundance of choices. And typically, a lot of the foods that we have available to us are not necessarily foods that are available to us within this context of bioregionalism, of what's growing at this particular time in this season in our area. So, what are your thoughts when it comes to, or rather maybe articulating this a different way, how do we come to know the foods and the plants to use in our particular area? I know this is all about, taking the time to learn more about the land and what is growing around us, but I guess what I'm getting at is, do you suggest to your students to read books? Are there mentors? Is it just a matter of looking up certain plants on the internet and having a bit of a field guide and looking at what's around our particular area?
Yes, all of that.
Mm.
So obviously, for someone like me and also yourself, we live in a natural environment, so it's much easier for us to, firstly, grow food because we have land to grow it on, but also for us to get out there and wild forage. But for people who are living in an urban environment, one of the things that I would suggest is go and get yourself some herbs and grow them on your balcony. Go and get yourself some potting mix and some seeds. Buy some good heirloom seeds for some leafy greens. Kale is an amazing winter green, as is collard greens, as is silver beet. And we can nourish our body with these particular greens by growing them on our balconies. So I think it doesn't take too much just to sort of initiate a little bit of um, understanding around nourishing ourselves with our own food. There is actually nothing greater than that feeling. I know that you know this too, Kai, when you go out and you pick something, and then within like 5 minutes, you're you're consuming the medicine of that food in full knowledge that it was just in the soil, and it was still holding all the mineral content and all the energy within it. It hasn't lost it through transport and through being in storage. So even if you're just including a small amount, that is still such an amazing process. And for some people, that might become a much bigger process down the track in their lives when they move to a place that they can actually have a garden. And then, of course, like you were saying, online, just start being curious and having a look online what particular foods are in the season that you can possibly grow yourself. But it doesn't have to be grandioso. It can be just the smallest little thing, a couple of herbs on your kitchen windowsill.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then as we get deeper into this path of herbalism and just learning the plants that are in our area and what kind of qualities they have to nourish us at different times of our lives and nourish us at different times within the cyclical seasons, what I'm curious to delve into a little bit further, or to try and gain a bit more of take a bit of a zoom out and get a bit of an overview, an umbrella perspective on, is you mentioned that we're entering bear medicine and this
Yeah.
time of nourishing the bones and the blood and the lymphatic system.
Mm.
What I would love to hear your take on is, if possible, a bit of a simplistic explanation of why we would want to be nourishing these aspects of our physiology at this particular time, and perhaps just shine a bit of a spotlight on how we want to be nourishing ourselves at these different times throughout the season. So how do we want to be nourishing our body during winter and as we move into spring and then summer and then autumn? I know we're all so different physiologically. We all have our unique makeup, and our body wants different things at different times throughout our lives. So it is hard to put a bit of a generalization on that. But is there similarities that you see that the body needs within these different cyclical seasons?
Definitely, definitely. Even though you were saying we're all different because we all have different makeup, we're still, if we're living in a specific bioregion or region in itself, like we're all in winter here in the Southern Hemisphere, then we're all going into bear medicine. We're all moving into dream time. We're all going into the energy of introspection. So when we think about winter, the energy goes in. So we want to work with food or nourishment that is working on a deep, nourishing level, hence why I was speaking to bones and blood. And when we start to nourish our bodies through the winter time and on a seasonal level, what we're doing is we're preparing ourselves for the season that's coming up. So when we work on the nourishment through winter, we're creating a really good, stable base so that in the springtime, which is often a time when people get hay fever and the flu, it's actually in the transition of seasons that people get sick rather than deep in the season itself. Because what's happening is the energy in our body is moving from being very in to coming out and expansive. And it's at that point, if people haven't nourished themselves enough or worked on their yin energy and really, spent the time on their introspection, sitting next to Father Fire, and just pondering and breathing and eating nourishing food, turning the lights off, sitting in the dark, if we're not doing these things, then that is going to be a harder transition for people. It's just in general. Whether for some people it might be physical because of conditions they hold, for some people it's going to be more emotional because then they haven't given themselves that time to digest. So I guess in a way this time is about really digesting, slowing down. And as we move into the spring, our energy is becoming more expansive and it's starting to push out into the world. The plants are starting to grow. So when we look to nature, it gives us an indication of what's happening within our own selves and our own bioregion because it's the macro micro, right? So at that time we start to look to leafy greens. We start to look to foods that are more about detoxification. We want to get our liver moving because during the winter we're eating more sort of heavier foods. So we want to sort of get the liver moving in springtime. So we would look to beginning juicing regimes. We would look to eating more raw food, more plant-based food, more food that adds light to our bodies. And then, of course, the transition from spring into summer is the energy is becoming way more expansive and we're working with the sun. And that is when we start to eat lighter. We would eat less frequently. We would juice more than we would. And in fact, from my own understanding of food as medicine, I wouldn't encourage people to necessarily juice through winter, through the depths of winter. I would be saying have a very, very a broth, have a medicinal broth with mushrooms, with medicinal mushrooms and wakame seaweed, and get some shiitake in there and some tamari and garlic and horseradish and those really deep nourishing foods. When we go into spring, juicy greens, do that kind of thing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. And what I'm getting at here is that there does seem to be some simple threads for us to follow as the seasons shift, but at the same time, as we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and inextricably intertwined within that understanding is an experiential knowing of what holistic health constitutes. And as we develop more of that understanding of holistic health, that comes in relationship to the shifting of the tides, so to
Yeah.
speak. So it's tuning in to all of these elements as the seasons change and how this relates to us on a very internal level. Like you were saying, in the summertime, the sun is rising higher in the sky. There's more daylight. It's a time of growth. We see the flourishment of all the plants around us, and we ourselves are getting outside more and we're becoming more active. So of course, when we're tuning into the plant world, it's got to reflect that in a sense. The same when we're dropping back down into autumn, and I'd love to hear you finish the cycle in a moment. Like when we do start to come through autumn and then back into winter again, it's the time of coming inside, and the sun isn't as high in the sky, and it's the days are shorter and we're reclusing more, and as you say, it's time to nourish ourselves on a much deeper level. So those heavier foods, those warmer foods. So yeah, just reflecting back that understanding that it is multidimensional when we're looking at our relationship with the outside world on many different levels.
It's a continuous um, symbiotic reciprocity that's happening with the world around us and with ourselves, and it's bringing ourselves back into that understanding of that attunement. And the autumn and the spring are the transitional seasons to the winter and the summer. So that's the time where we'll be kind of like, in a way, we're moving into that depth, or we're moving out of that depth. So they're really important times for us to take care, because as I was saying, that's often when people will actually get sick, is in those particular transitional times. So that might be when we, if we are to supplement, um, I would suggest that's where we would increase our herbal infusions at that particular time. So we would drink, um, herbs like stinging nettle, because stinging nettle is excellent for the blood, but it's also really, really good for the immune system, and it's really good for people who have allergies. So I would encourage people to get onto nettle infusions in the springtime as we're moving out of winter into spring. Get on infusions, and infusions aren't like herbal teas. Herbal teas are great, but they're not hugely medicinal. They taste great, and energetically they nourish us, but if we really want to get into the medicinal side of it, we have to have at least 30 grams of a specific plant material to 1 liter of water for it to have that real deep effect medicinally.
Would you be able to give us a bit of a distinction between what the process of making a tea would be, which seems very, very simple on the surface, versus what we
Yeah.
might be looking at when we're talking about, say, an infusion or something like that?
Okay. So, well, a herbal tea, I feel like, is a beautiful ritual, and it's a pleasure. And of course, there are medicinal qualities to all the plants. So your body might touch into those. If you make yourself a pot of tea and you let it sit for 5 to 7 minutes, and whenever I make up little blends for people, I'll often say, use the tea as a ritual. So light a candle, and if I give them information on the specific plants, I'll ask them to attune to the information that I gave them on the plant spirit, and it becomes this beautiful nourishment on an emotional, energetic level, with a little bit of the medicinal side, of course. But when we get into an infusion, we're getting into the full blown deep medicine that exists within inside that plant. And stinging nettle, I bring up because it is such a it's a powerhouse of a medicine, and I do believe that it is probably one of the plants that is helping assist humanity, and it really is stepping forward to want to work more with us, because it is so deeply nourishing to our bodies. So when we take an infusion, we want to have a large amount of plant material, and we let it sit overnight, or at least 4 hours, but up to 12 hours. So generally infusions are going to be cold. So you leave it, you put the plant material in a liter jar, fill it up with hot water, stick it on the bench, let it sit for at least 4 hours or overnight, strain it. And then what I normally do is I do it at night. Then the next morning, I'll strain it out and then I'll just drink it throughout the day.
So I would
that's
love to
very.
Yeah, no, that's all great. What I was going to ask you is, with all of your wealth of knowledge that you have and all of this, as we both know, this path just goes deeper and deeper and deeper and more expansive. So for someone that has little to no reference point into all this stuff and is feeling a little bit overwhelmed just with this influx of information, how have you learnt all of these skills, and what are some of the other sources, specific sources that you would recommend to others? Do you have a particular mentor? Have you learnt from specific books or from websites? What can you pass on to others?
Oh, well, I suppose in all of the above. So, I was lucky enough to do work with a group of women when I was quite young. So I got passed on a lot of information through initiation work with witches, with plant witches.
Mm.
Um, yeah, that was an incredible experience for me. So that's where I learnt. That's when I was very young, and then I studied herbalism, and then through time, it's just been books, and I research a lot online too. So if something strikes my interest, I'll look at many different sources because it's very important to be a critical thinker. And it's very important to check in with what feels true for you. So I would say to someone, if there's something that's, if this interests you, if this whole concept of food as medicine interests you, get online and have a look, but don't just go to one place. Have a look around and read different people's perspectives on things and take on what feels true for you. That's the sovereignty aspect. Is this feels true for me? I like this bit, I don't like this bit. There are so many different books out there too. I can't actually even think of one off the top of my head because really through my lifetime I've probably just taken parts from heaps of different sources, and then a lot of it is through experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is one of the benefits of living in the technological era. Yes, many of
Yeah.
us don't have access to our ancestral roots and the witches that would pass on the herbal knowledge down
Yeah.
the lines, but we do have the means of jumping online and using technology to our advantage in many different ways, and that's such a big source of learning for so many of us these days.
And I think it's so important for people to feel empowered if that something's of interest to them, because that links us back into there's something inside someone that's waking up and they want to know about it, and we don't want to squash that down. We want to, we want to cheerlead that person and we want to help that person to grow more of that. And that's why I do think this offering that you're doing right now, for example, Kai, is so important because it's helping people access information that they might not otherwise. And they might listen to these podcasts and there'll be some little snippet of information that just resonates with them. So then you take that piece of information and research, but just remember to always be critical, good critical thinker. Always, always question everything. Don't take whatever any one person is saying as verbatim. Just make sure you're checking it with your intuition. Does this align with me? Is this of my greatest good?
Yeah,
Even if
absolutely. Yeah.
you know,
Pardon, what was that?
I said everything, even everything I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Question everything. Yeah, that's something that I say often, and this comes back full circle to tapping into our original human blueprint, as you were
That's
speaking as
it.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's shedding all of the conditioning and all the preconceived notions and everything that we've picked up along the way, and allowing ourselves a space to be able to connect in with the truth of who we are and what feels right and what resonates with us, and what is coming through, what our heart's calling is singing out for, the soul's essence that's wanting to express itself. And this whole birdsong creation is part of that for me. It's wanting to offer another source of learning for the collective, but also for myself as well, talking to people like
Yeah.
you who have a deep knowledge of the plants. And this is kind of swaying from the plants into another aspect that you were talking about earlier, and which has to do with the witches, learning from the witches. So was this back in New Zealand when you were younger?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm curious to know how learning or growing up in New Zealand and continuing to foster that connection with your roots, how has that informed your work when it comes to connecting with land and connecting with your ancestors and how you navigate a ceremonial and ritualistic life here on Australian soil?
Oh, that's such a good question. For me, I have a philosophy, you could call it, and it's, I suppose, in a way, it becomes a protocol because I follow it, of always ceremonially honouring the land that I took my first breath and the land that I now walk on. And this is something that I pass forward to my students, and it's one of the first things that I'll teach with my mentoring students is engaging in our childlike curiosity and remembering of where we came from. And when we move into the space of non ordinary reality, we understand more how time doesn't really exist. So we can call forward that remembering of our first breath or the land that we walked on. So for me, New Zealand has never left me. Aotearoa sits in my bones, it sits in my blood, and it's, who I am. And then when I sit here on this land, I honor the original people and the ancestors of this land, and the plant people, the tree people, the mineral people of this land. So I'm holding both aspects always in reverence. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And what comes to mind is, do you have students that come in? And if you do, how do you help them navigate any kind of disconnect? Or perhaps we could even call it trauma in a sense, because some people may not have that deep connection and reverence towards the lands that they came from. And that could be due to coming from a place where they don't feel, well, where they don't feel connected to their parents,
Yeah.
where they have resentment towards parents or towards the land that they came from, and they just have a hard time tapping into any perceived positive qualities of their ancestry. And of course, tied into that ancestry is the lands that they came from. So, how do you kind of help people navigate that space if they are feeling that?
So yeah, that does come up from time to time. And so my question to that particular person would be, what in your remembering is a place where you have felt connected? Um, it might be when they were a teenager or when they were a young adult and they travelled to a specific place, and like, I'll give an example. When I was early 20s, I was in Nepal. And when I landed in Nepal, I got off the plane and I stood there and I cried because of the remembering. I knew in every part of me, I was like, I've been here before. And so that land was in me, that land, the remembering of that land. And so we will take that person to a place that they do feel connection to. So it doesn't necessarily have to be where you took your first breath. It can be just a place that you felt connected through your life. For some people, it's like where they spent childhood holidays. That comes up from time to time. But there's this childlike curiosity that I feel like is really important for this work, because it takes us into that space of imagination. And when we go into that space of imagination, it's much easier for us to access the non-ordinary.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
If
think
we're
as
not,
we
sorry.
when we delve down this path and we kind of shed more and more layers, and I'm coming to recognize this on a much deeper level now, is that we do tend to tend the flame of curiosity even more. And perhaps if we are nourishing our connection with lands that we have been to, and we can't quite tap into these beneficial or positive qualities that I mentioned that we perceive from our ancestry or from our original lands where we took our first breath, over time, it's, at least for me, those threads kind of, they start to tug quietly at first, and then a little bit harder, almost like that thread of curiosity saying, maybe it is time to, or maybe I'll take a look at that. And I'm noticing that through my Filipino roots. a lot more now. So tapping into Filipino ancestry, I didn't have that much of a strong connection with my mother growing up. So there was always a disconnect between my Filipino roots and who I was. I kind of disconnected myself from that. But as I'm growing older and I'm finding myself going down a deeper path of nature-based spirituality, earth-honoring traditions, and of course, honoring and respecting my ancestors because they've obviously paved the path for me to be here today, I do feel that curiosity to go and explore those parts of my past.
Yeah, and I feel like in that sense, like you're speaking to the ancestry, we can go further back beyond our own experience, back into the actual ancestral experience of that land, and tap into that. Get curious about your own ancestors, and that, I feel like that can heal some of the trauma and those wounds that we can hold through our own personal story, but also the story of our own ancestral connection as well to certain places and spaces. And I feel like, a lot of here from a shamanic perspective, a lot of healing and trauma can happen through a lot of healing can happen with the trauma through that connection to the land. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you are familiar with Daniel 4.
I am very much. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for the listeners, Daniel 4 has a fantastic book called Ancestral Medicine, which delves into a lot of these topics in quite an expansive way of how to connect with our ancestry and how to heal a lot of that ancestral trauma and get back in touch with our roots.
It's a great book.
So, what have you learned in regards to New Zealand earth honoring traditions and nature based spirituality that you can share here with us?
Well, I left New Zealand when I was quite young, so I was in my early 20s. So I, funnily enough, that's something that's coming up. I want to go home for a period of time, and do some study with the indigenous plants of Aotearoa, and with some of the indigenous medicine people. So I didn't get a chance to do that when I was younger, and I feel like um, that's because the time is coming up, and I had to go through this whole process of my initiation work to get to a point where I could receive that. I wasn't ready when I was younger. When I worked with learning about plants when I was younger, it was from a Western herbal perspective, and more from the Greenwich lineage. So understanding weeds and their medicinal qualities, and global plants, which is still something I know the most about. So plants that exist everywhere. So they grow in my bioregion, but they also grow in yours. Stinging nettle, plantain, chickweed, dandelions. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. It seems like we're going down somewhat of a similar trajectory in that path of feeling more curious towards our own roots.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's something I would love to learn more about, that's for sure. So eventually I'll get to do that. I don't know when or how, but I put that up into my dreamscape, and I'll wait for the time for that to, and the right person to pop up for me to go home and sit with for a period of time and learn.
This is kind of an
Because we're always,
obscure question. Yeah, absolutely, of course. Yeah, I mean, everything that we have, that we come into contact with, has the potential to be our teacher.
yeah.
And this is part of how I language the medicine path. It's that with the right perspective, absolutely everything and anything has the potential to be medicine for us.
I agree so much. I often say to my students that nature is my greatest psychologist. I'm forever in awe and learning every single time I sit with nature and sit with the land. Put a question out there and you'll get the answer.
A question that's coming in through now, and as I was going to say, this is somewhat of a little bit of an obscure question, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it anyway. So you have mentioned a couple of times words such as, please correct me if I'm saying this incorrectly, Papatuanuku?
That's correct. Yeah.
Papatuanuku, yeah, which is Maori for Mother Earth, yeah. So I guess when we're using this sacred language, it's the old language, the ancient language.
Mm.
Why do you feel that there is an importance and an inclination to tap back into this particular type of way of articulating ourselves and our relationship with the world using the old language?
I feel like when we tap back into the old language, it has a frequency and an energy behind it that is beyond our conscious understanding. So when we sing medicine songs, when we sing the songs of plants, when we sing chorus, we are going beyond the human understanding. So someone can sit in the presence of of an old language or a song, plant song, and you don't need to know what it means. You just know. Your body knows. It's like osmosis. It goes into the cells. The cells remember. So I think there's an importance for that, the use of that, when you can, when you can.
Mm.
So if I use the word Papatuinuku because I come from New Zealand, I mean, I usually will use Pachamama, I'll use Mother Earth, the Great Mother, but, like, when I use the word Papatuinuku, it definitely, like, it's almost like I can feel it deeper in my body because it connects to the land where I took my first breath. And we speak to the land, our ancestors being that of where we were born. So my whakapapa, my tapuna, where I come from, the mountains, the streams, the rivers, they're our ancestors. So actually that harks back to what you were saying about if someone has trauma in the land or from where they came from in their family lineage, tap back into the land itself, the mountains, the bioregion of that land, if you have access to that, and see them as your ancestors. If you can't see your human ones, see your see your see your nature ones. Yeah.
So yeah,
So we're
yeah, we're
exploring.
we're twisting around those vines of remembrance whenever we are tapping into the sacred language, the old language. Like you say, there's a visceral feeling
That's
that
it.
can be
It's
noticed, yeah, deep on a cellular level. That
mm,
remembrance, that knowing that goes beyond the rational, logical mind. It's kind of the same as when we are entering into a deeply sincere ceremonial space, or when we are sitting by the fire. There's that feeling, that knowing, I've done this before and I've done this for a long time before I was actually ever in this physical form.
it's the best.
Mm, mm. So, talking about tapping into these things that you're mentioning, what would you suggest to people when it comes to ways that we can just walk outside our front door right now, and how can we tap into a way of reconnecting with the natural world, our immediate environment, and also not just as an observer, but as an active participant in the greater web of interconnected life. And you have mentioned a couple of ways, such as just being observant of everything that's around us and planting your own herbs. But I'm also curious to know if there are any other suggestions that people can implement on a very simplistic, easy daily level.
One thing I would suggest to people is go outside, go for a walk to your local park, or if you've got land yourself, sit on your own land and go to a tree, go to a plant, and just sit with that plant or that tree and start to exchange your breath. That'll be the number one thing that I would say. So working with the thing is, right, that we're always in a symbiotic relationship just through our exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen with the natural world anyway, just from a science perspective. So sometimes that's a good segue for people to understand that it is an actual thing that is happening on a 3D level, And then when you start to work with the breath and that exchange of your oxygen, your carbon dioxide to the tree's oxygen, you're starting to find that beautiful dance that's happening, and just breathing with the tree. And introduce yourself. Introduce yourself to the plant, to the tree, to the land that you're sitting on. Hi, my name's Renee, and I'm coming to sit here to learn, and I'm coming to sit here to give my gratitude for holding me, or for your teachings, or for your healings. And then become the observed. So when I speak about being observing, I also further down will speak about becoming the observed. And sometimes when we shift and we flip to that, to allowing nature to observe us, it starts to deepen our understanding of what it means to be connected to the natural world. So I feel like that's a good start, just the breath, introducing ourselves, and then just being observed, being the observer and being the observed.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And from a Western standpoint, talking to the trees and the plants, it's often seen as a little bit strange, but only because we are so disconnected from that animistic way of relating, of seeing everything as its own unique individual expression of life. And there's such potency in being able to drop into a space within ourselves and relate in that way and actually speak, not just think, but actually, like you say,
Speak. Yeah.
voice ourselves.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll find the song, you'll find the old language that sits within you, and you might even start to hum it out. You might start to speak it out. You might find, these sounds wanting to come out of your body, as an offering. And of course, you can take offering. You can take some mapacho, some sacred tobacco. You can take some rose petals. You can take some cacao, if you want to take a physical offering and just place it somewhere as well. Um, you know, One thing from a shamanic perspective and from an animistic perspective is we must always feed the spirits continuously. We must feed the spirits in order for us to receive the healing and the teaching. We must feed the spirits.
Mm. And this ties into the word aini. Are you familiar with the word? Yeah, sacred reciprocity.
Yeah, reciprocity. Yeah,
Yeah, always. Yeah,
we
not
call it
not
koha in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, koha. Mm.
koha. Okay, yeah, and this is such an important thread that we're touching on because we're just we're so used in a Western context of just taking without the thought of giving anything back at all. So to be in that state of consciousness and that state of being on and cultivating that on a daily within a daily practice and asking ourselves, what is it that I can give back?
It teaches us much about interrelationship with humans, and that's another thing I bring up often with my students is, you know, look to the land, for your teaching, and then see how that translates to how you relate to another person. Because when we slow down and we learn this way, we're able to sit in a much more transparent state with another person. We're able to be a bit more mindful of that person, or a bit more forgiving of that other person.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote from Ram Dass, and he speaks to this. I don't know whether you've heard this before, and I'm going to absolutely butcher what he had to say, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. And what he's doing is he's talking about his relationship with the trees. And when he's looking at the trees, he's not looking at them and wanting them to change. He's just seeing them for what they are. And some of them are big and beautiful and tall with amazing canopies, and they've gotten all of the light. And then sometimes the trees are little gnarled, little overhanging, hardly hanging on to life at all. And they're looking crusty, and they obviously haven't gotten a lot of light. They're sitting in damp soil. And he's just making the observation that we don't look at nature and wish that this one particular thing was different. We just see it for what it is, and reflecting on how different things would be if we could take that perception and apply it in a sense to the way that we perceive our fellow humans. not looking at someone. And because when we are engaging with humans, we get entangled emotionally to such a greater degree. So being able to sit back and just see a person for all that they are, and just to be able to accept that, not wanting
Yeah,
to not wanting to go out of our way to enforce change.
that's it. Not wanting to mold something into dominate something and control it into the way, manipulate, So you can see how the more we reconnect in this way, and the more we take responsibility for it ourselves and do this work, the more it's going to have a wave effect through community, through the collective consciousness, through humanity on a global scale. And this is why, I know so much of what we want to create change in is, happening outside ourselves. But if we just sit back and start to do this inner work, it's going to do the outer work. It can't not. It's physics, it's energy, it just is.
Are there any ceremonial practices and or ritualistic practices that you implement on a daily basis that you resonate with most at the moment?
Uh, yes, well, a friend of mine recently said this to me, and it's so true, is that my life is an altar. So I kind of live my life as it is an altar. So um, a couple of the things that I do on a daily basis is I will always make offering to the land. Or if I'm working with a specific plant, I'll make an offering to that plant on a daily basis. So I'll always go outside at some point, and often I will build a mandala with nature, with plants and with leaves and flowers as an offering to spirit of place. And I will always offer song. So I will chant and sing to the water, and also to the plants if I'm working with a specific plant totem or ally. Another thing that is a daily ritual from a ceremonial perspective for me is altars, my altar. So often, if I'm outside and I have an offering from the forest, I'll ask to take a piece. We must always do that, by the way. You must ask to take something. So I'll take a piece of the plant and I'll bring it home and I'll place it on my altar. And so there's always energy going back into my altar. I have many altars in the house, but um, specifically the one that I have in my apothecary in my healing room. And then another thing that I don't do daily, but is a very big part of my life, is sacred cacao, as you know, Kai. And so often I'll make a brew up of cacao and I'll take that with me when I go and sit with the land. And I always give the first mouthful to Pachamama, and often I'll give the last to the river, and then I'll drink what's between. And that just allows me to drop more into my work, because a lot of my growth is intrinsically intertwined with my offering to the world. So I kind of have to, well, not have to, but I choose to do what I do in order to be of service.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Such a lovely expression. There's a couple of things that I would love to go down just briefly. One of them is sacred cacao, but before that, what I wanted to ask was, when we are asking a plant if we can take something, how do we know if the plant says yes or no?
Um, it comes through a feeling space that we call in the plant world felt sense. So it's a feeling that you get. And the more that we attune to that feeling space within ourselves, which comes through meditation and just inner work, you just get a yes or a no. You get this feeling that you're allowed to take it. To be honest with you, more often than not, they are so happy for us to take a piece. They actually want to work with us. They want, because they're part of our ancestry, they're in our DNA. Plants and fungi are in our DNA, from the beginning. And so they're very, very happy to become part of us and work with us. But it's a term that we call felt sense. Yeah.
Yeah, another way that people might language that could be something along the lines of intuition. But
Intuition.
it doesn't come from solely being up here in
Comes from,
the logical, rational thinking mind. Yeah, absolutely. And what was a teaching from one of my Indigenous mentors many, many, many moons ago was he mentioned that if the plant doesn't snap or break off in the first go, that's the
yes,
plant saying, not this particular branch.
that's it. That is a true story. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and sometimes, if we're going foraging as well, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, especially in medicine traditions, if we're out searching for mushrooms or someone's out in the desert and they're searching for peyote, it is to not take the first one that we see, because that first one that we see, it may be the only one that is in the area.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I've always learned to just be mindful and not take the first one that I see, but continue on. And then if the second presents itself, then I present the question. And like you say, the plants are allies, and they're almost always willing to oblige and be of assistance on our human path and experience.
Yeah, they have so many healing gifts for us on so many different levels. I am humbled constantly by it. And there's a term that I've been using recently, that the plant kingdom, or the plant medicine kingdom, plant teachers have this backward learning where we I've been calling it that, because it's like we go through things, we go through experience, and it comes later on that we understand that the plants have been teaching us all along. And that's what keeps us out of ego, is this kind of backward learning. So the learning's happening, and then we can go back and look at how it's weaved through our journey. And you have these aha moments. And another thing I just wanted to point out, like you were talking about, when we go out, we forage for certain medicines. It's really, really important that we honor certain ways of harvesting. So, for example, with the fungi kingdom, we must always make sure we're cutting the mushroom off, and we're not pulling it out of its roots. So we're not disconnecting it from its mycelium. And just making sure that we're putting into action very specific protocols, to make sure we're honoring the plants as well. And if you're out foraging, don't take it all. Don't go out there and see all the stinging nettle and harvest all the stinging nettle. Make sure you leave some behind, and leave some for the next person.
I love this idea of backwards learning as well. And I've touched on this in a previous podcast episode, and it's something that I've been chewing on for a while. And Dr. Martin Shaw touches on this idea of initiation, and that it's not when we are being initiated into something, we can't really grab or grasp with full certainty or clarity what it is that we're actually being initiated into. Rather, it's 10 steps down the path and a big stone's throw away that we can actually reflect back on the trailhead and go, oh, this is actually what it is that I have been initiated into. So in a sense, a different way of languaging that backwards learning.
That's correct. And also, it's fascinating me at the moment. I've been feeling into it a lot, or wanting to sort of understand how the plant realm works that way specifically. And I continually keep coming back to it. Keeps us out of attachment to our ego, of it having to be a way, or that I want this now. Like, I want to know all about, a specific plant and how to use it right now. Whether it's a master plant teacher, or just a beautiful, nourishing weed, it's like you will never ever have the full picture. So it's just sit back and allow yourself to be taught however it reveals itself. And often it's after the fact. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So touching on sacred cacao,
Oh yeah.
this is something I wanted to touch on. So, we see cacao and it's packaged next to the coconut flakes and the chia seeds in the supermarkets, and I know that there are plenty of people who think, what's the big deal? Why does it have to be sacred cacao? And then on the flip side of that, it seems like ceremonial cacao facilitators are, they're sprouting up everywhere like little springtime seedlings. And it's kind of like the cacao facilitator is the more common version of becoming an ayahuasca facilitator, in a sense,
I've noticed.
But from what I understand, if we look back in prehistory, the old times, the ancient times, back when the sacred languages were still being spoken, that have largely been lost to the sands of time, over in Central America and beyond, the Mayans and the Aztecs, from what I understand, they had a big reverence for cacao. But for whatever reason, the past many years, cacao has been making a return as a sacred ceremonial plant. And this could be said for many other plants as well. But in the same breath, we're typically not finding many of these other sacred plants on the supermarket shelving. So I'd love to hear your take on, all of these strands, all of these little raindrops underneath the larger umbrella of cacao in general.
Oh, that's it's a sticky subject for me. I have to tread carefully. I I worry a little about the popularity of it. And saying that, I'm in it, like it's part of what I do, which is interesting because it kind of, in a way, um, goes against my philosophies around bioregionalism because cacao does not grow where I live.
And this
But
is
I have a
something I wanted to ask you as well, like how you kind of reconcile that relationship. Because I understand the difference between the bioregionalist perspective, but then also being called to carry a particular type of medicine that comes from a different environment.
and that's part of holding that flame keeping, that ancestral flame keeping of something that possibly exists within your spiritual lineage. And believe you me, Kai, I have struggled with that one. And probably the best way for me to explain this is through a story, something that actually happened to me. Um, Story medicine. So I've been serving cacao in a ceremonial manner for quite a number of years now. So pre it becoming really popular. And probably about 2 years ago, was when I really started to delve into the bioregionalism in a big time, in a big way. And that's when I started to think, hang on a minute, I don't feel like I'm worthy or honorable enough to be able to hold ceremony with sacred cacao. And I really, really struggled with it to the point where I used to have my ceremonies used to be like fully booked all the time, months in advance, didn't even have to do any work around them. And as soon as I started thinking that way, well, I wasn't getting any bookings, people were pulling out. It's like the environment completely mirrored back to me what I was feeling. Reality did. Fast forward to about a year ago, and I had contact with a friend of mine, a woman who became a close friend of mine who lives in Guatemala. And at the time, I didn't know too much about what she did in Guatemala. And she said, I'm coming to Australia and I think we should meet. And this is right when I was not feeling connected to cacao and I was feeling like, for want of a better word, I was feeling like a bit of, a bit of a farce. I was like, I don't even know why should I be working with you, medicine? And I was really, really confused about it. And she turns up at my door. She comes to Australia. She turns up to my door, and in her hands, she has sacred cacao. And she brings to me sacred cacao from Guatemala, from a lineage of women who produce and work with this particular cacao in Guatemala. So they are Mayan women. And she says, I had been asking the spirit of cacao if I was meant to be working with cacao. And the way cacao spirit turned up was bringing me a person from Guatemala to my front door in the forest holding cacao from the Mayan women. And I'm like, if that isn't a sign from the cacao spirit, then what is? So for me, that was an indication that it was part of my lineage and part of my responsibility to help um, use this medicine in a way that was honorable to the plant spirit and to the Mayan people. because obviously it was there for me in my blueprint. So part of the part of how I have to do that is by making sure that, certain parameters around it are honoured, and I don't believe that they are everywhere. And also that it was okay for me to go ahead and hold ceremony with this particular medicine. And I, of course, part of my next step is when we're free to travel again, is I want to be able to head over there and sit with the Mayan women on their land, and head to Peru as well for other work. Yeah,
Mm. Yeah, beautiful story.
amazing. That's how it's work,
Yeah, look,
Mm.
we're kind of opening up a rabbit hole that I don't we don't have the time to go down, but there are so many little tunnels that we could weave in and out of here. But what I wanted to get your take on was one, the thought that comes in, that I can feel coming in, is from a skeptical point of view. One could say, well, maybe that was just coincidence. Yeah. Who's to say that cacao spirits are just coming in and giving you a sign to serve cacao, just like anyone else on the street could be saying, oh, I got this message from, someone this place and that place, and it was a cacao speaking to me. What would you say to these particular people? And secondly, to that question, without getting too deep into the density and the ins and outs of revering sacred cacao in a ceremonial context, what are some of the fundamental parameters that you're speaking to that require to be upheld when working with cacao in this way?
Okay, so your first question, about the skeptical aspect, I have that in me also, and that's why things have got to come back to critical thinking and your own intuition. And I would just say to those people, that's okay. You're absolutely entitled to believe that, but I know what I was asking, and I know the experience that I received and the feeling that I got from that, and that's what I know, and I know that to be true, so I won't question that. So again, it's like people are entitled to their own opinions, but I know what I know, and I know what I felt in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, this ties into shamanic ways of knowing, and it's only through direct experiential personal knowing that we can come to fully understand these things on an embodied holistic level. So I guess just touching on that point and asking you that question is my
Yeah,
encouragement is for other people that are skeptical. It's, yeah, you absolutely have every right to be skeptical, but you will never have that understanding by spending your time up here, which is where the skepticism comes from, through the logical, rational, reasoning mind, just always overthinking everything. It comes from a place that it's
it's a
beyond
knowing.
that. It's much deeper
It
than that.
it's a knowing, and also because it wasn't something that just happened. I had been literally calling out, I felt so confused about my connection on a ceremonial level to that particular medicine, and whether I was worthy or not. So it was like my call was answered, and that's all I needed. And also it initiated me on a deeper level into the work with that medicine and holding ceremony with that medicine. So I wasn't questioning myself as much anymore,
Mm.
you know. It keeps you
What
humble.
if,
That's
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I resonate with that. What are some
mm,
of the fundamental parameters that you speak to, if you can share them?
yeah. So I feel like there is a need to understand historically where cacao comes from. So in the West, it's popular because people see it as this beautiful heart opening medicine, and it increases oxygenation through the body, so it can give you a little bit of a, through the right parameters, it can give you a bit of a psychoactive sort of feeling space through meditation or through shamanic processes. But I feel like there has to be. Oh, sorry about that. My phone was falling down. I feel like there needs to be an understanding of its historical and its ancestral lineage. and that needs to be spoken to, and whoever is working with cacao needs to be able to access that information, whether it's going online and doing some research, whether it's sitting with another cacao practitioner and hearing the stories that they have to tell. Um, there needs to be reverence, there needs to be offering, there needs to be spiritual hygiene practices, there needs to be a safe container held by someone with experience to hold ceremonial space. It doesn't matter if you're working with chocolate or you're working with madre or you're working with San Pedro, all of it still needs to have the right parameters held. And this is what I feel isn't necessarily happening in a lot of the Western popularity with cacao. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And while the chemical and the pharmacological aspects, like you were speaking to, of cacao and how it induces it induces different, a release of neurotransmitters and chemicals within our body. It can make us feel certain ways. Yeah, that's only one piece of the puzzle. It's only one tiny
Yeah.
piece of understanding. There is the ancestry, to use the language that we've been using in this conversation, the whole ancestry of cacao that needs to be
Mm,
taken into consideration, and not just taken into consideration, but worked with on this experiential level that we're speaking to.
correct. It's like people often, I think people will just, again, they'll take what someone else says verbatim, but part of it is the initiation work with the medicine itself. So, it's like if you're going to work with the medicine and serve other people, you need to be working with the medicine yourself, and you need to be working with it, feeding the spirit of that medicine constantly, because it's initiating you, like what happened to me. I'd been serving it for 5 years before that happened. And then I just had this complete disconnect, and because I was going through a deeper level of understanding of where it belonged in the bigger picture of my medicine path journey.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, so we won't go down the cacao path too uh, on too much of an extensive level, and I think it's a good time to slowly start wrapping things up. But jumping from cacao, what we perhaps could weave into is, in light of the current situation that we find ourselves in, how has this affected how you are offering your work, and what is it that you are currently offering to community in this time?
So at the moment, I'm not holding any ceremonies. As soon as restrictions lift a little more, I have mentoring students ready to come join me. So what I do is I work with small groups of people of up to 5 in a residency situation. So they come to me for a week. So people come and I put them up in accommodation, and they spend every day, all day with me for 7 days. And in those 7 days, we go through all sorts of initiation work with the elements, with plants, with finding what our personal medicine is within the nature spirituality context. We go through the concept of an altar or a mesa and building one ourselves. We do some, drum journeying and just all sorts of different things. And I basically just kind of throw all the medicines I have available at people to help them find that part of their blueprint. And that's over a week. It's a lot of fun. And so that will be happening as soon as restrictions lift, and I'll probably run another one in the spring. My winter one's already fully booked. I've got an online course I'm almost finished on plant communication and spirit of place. It's a 4-week beginner's course. I'll run that again. I don't have dates yet, but there's one week left. So probably in a month or two, I'll rerun that. But if you follow through the socials, through Instagram and Facebook, I'll pop it up there. Um, the other thing that I have got available is all the medicines. So I have tinctures and oils, and I make up plant medicine bath blends, and I have vibrational mists and flower essences and all sorts of different things. And generally, people just ask me to intuit it for them. Yeah. because they're seasonal, so I only have them in small batch, so it's always changing. So I never really put anything up on my website. It's just through Instagram mainly.
Yeah. And I will have all the links to your channels up on the description wherever this
Cool.
episode is being watched or listened to. So people will be able to find you through there.
Perfect. Yeah. So
Yeah.
people can contact me if they want to know more about any of those offerings or any of my actual medicine offerings as well.
And the beginner's course that you were speaking to, just from the name, Plant Communication and Spirit of Place, it sounds like it touches on much of what we've been weaving in and out of through this conversation, but on a much more deep and expansive level.
Correct. More experimental, so people can actually get out there and do it, and I'll guide them through it. Yeah.
Beautiful. So I think this is a good place to wrap things up, Renée. So lastly, just as we opened up the space, I would love to invite you to share something to formally close our container. And to put a little bit of a twist on that, in closing, if you were to deliver your last 30-second speech to nature, to the old ones, the old gods, to your loved ones, to spirit, to the great mystery, what would that 30 seconds sound like?
It would probably be a chant. I would probably speak to them through song or through chanting. Yeah.
Is that something that you feel called to share here with us?
Yeah, I could do that.
Perhaps we could use that as our closing of our space.
All right. So if I could just ask everyone who's viewing this in the future moment just to close their eyes and take a few breaths and just slow everything down and just become aware of your peripheral behind you, in front of you, to the sides of you.
Aho, Renée. Thanks once again for joining me here on Birdsong today.
Oh, thank you so much, Kai. It's been amazing. I loved just talking to you. It's so refreshing.